all then know what a treasure this is. It's a one-of-a-kind collection of writings by Nebraska authors. There are artists. Weldon Keys, that's one of his paintings. He was also a poet and an artist and a photographer and all kinds of talents he had. We have original artwork from books. I know that several of the Ruth Rose Kress Hoffman books, who's a children's author, several of her original pieces from when they printed her books are in this collection. It's just a treasure, and they're one-of-a-kind things in this room, and we think it should continue, and it should always be here, and it should always be available to Nebraskans, because we all know how wonderfully talented Nebraskans are. So we would like to invite you to join us. This series of talks, the John Ames reading series, is financed and available for you through the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. And back where you might have stopped and gotten some coffee and cookies, and if you haven't before the reading tonight, you're certainly welcome to stop afterwards. There are some brochures, and this one is really an interesting one that tells about the Heritage Room. And there's a history behind the furnishings and the rug and everything in here. It's an interesting little brochure. Again, I told you that the Ames Reading Series is sponsored by the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. And also on that little rack back there by the coffee and cookies, you will find a little card that says if you would like to financially support this room, you certainly can become a donor. And I hope you all enjoy the reading this evening. It's going to be wonderful. And do come back and visit the Heritage Room and enjoy Nebraska's authors.
I would also like to welcome you to the Heritage Room. This evening we are very fortunate. We have David McCleery with us. He will be reading from his Poetry and Fiction. David McCleery's poems have appeared in 40 Nebraska Poets, Kansas Quarterly, Whole Notes, and other publications. He is currently working on developing a series of short programs featuring Nebraska poets on KZUM radio station, as well as working on a novel entitled Ordinary Happiness. Please join me in welcoming David McCleery.
Well, thank you all for coming out this evening. Being up here in the capacity of someone who writes poetry and fiction is not something I'm very familiar with, nor I think is it something I'm very comfortable with. For most of you know, for about the past 10 years I've worked in the grocery business, a place where poetry, unfortunately, is rarely discussed. My customers didn't think of me as a poet, and I'm sure my fellow employees didn't also. And yet, and I'm sure those who did know that I wrote poetry probably thought it was somewhat silly but harmless. But nonetheless, I'd go home each evening after working my 48-hour week and attempt to write, and I wrote sporadically at best during that time. All those years, I led a kind of double life. Outwardly, I was a grocery store manager concerned with profits and productivity, but inside I led this very real and exciting life of someone who cared about words and what they could do. Luckily, there came a point about a year ago where I was forced to make a decision to either increase my duties at work, which would probably not allow me much time to write, or give that up. And that was something I couldn't give up. So instead, I gave up the job. Luckily, my wife Margie was supportive enough to go along with it. What it came down to is not so much as a decision to work in a grocery store, right, but as a decision to save myself from what I saw as a system in which I was locking myself into and giving up a part of myself that I probably valued more than any other part. We've had to give up some things as far as material things, but what we've gained is probably immeasurable in just the time together with my wife and my daughter, and just more or less I feel more connected to life and living instead of being put away in this building every day in which I worked, and that was about all. In a sense, it allows me to live honorably as a poet in today's world. The first poem I'd like to read is entitled Still Life of the Attic. What is old and what is not wanted rises. What can't be helped or can't be held migrates toward a warmer climate, toward the last high room where Mother Mannequin is always boarding, always swelling her black canvas chest with pride, her hips thick with dust, her head filled with darkness, her smooth shoulders sliding away to nothing. She is holding out her arms of shadow, slowly growing her white wedding dress of web. Old shoes have gone off in search of her feet. The magazines pass month by month unread on the long pilgrimage to her side. The old clothes come home to roost. Dresses drag their feathered hems up the steep and narrow steps. Baseballs have gone over, lost and hidden. They are like the tomatoes of summer in long-blown grass. Dolls are sleeping on their backs, have closed their eyes, dream of the walk and the talk. Goodwill, DAV, Salvation Army are calling on the phone. She tells us not to answer, tells us there is nothing more to give. They knock on the door, no one home. They cruise around the block like sharks, their van doors open, catching the scent of dust. When our neighbors have a sale, the mannequin stands at the attic window, eyes their full garage. Jealous as a lover, she wants it all. Their broken vacuums, the tired sofa. Appliances drag their tattered tails across our leaf-blown street, beg like kittens at the door. She beckons and everything seems to pass like phantoms up through our flaking ceilings. What is old and what is not wanted rises. What we don't need and what we don't use leaves our grasp forever. This one is entitled Duplex. We live in the same rooms. What's left to him is right for me. He rents the morning and I the evening, and between us we own the whole day. We've got green carpet, 2 doors, 5 windows, and no place to hide. Our lives are so very close. Some nights I pause at the door, forgetting which door is mine. I look at the mailbox. This is good, I say. This is my name, and go in. I worry too much about his life. I suspicion he may smoke in bed, and worry he'll burn us both. I'm frightened he'll run out of sugar, or his phone will break, and he'll start using mine. I fear some jealous husband will mistake my side for his and blast out the windows with a shotgun. Other times I forget he's even there and go about my life. Once I had him over for a beer. We compared floor plans, furniture layouts. We laughed about putting a window in our adjoining wall. Now at night I hear him pounding, trying to break through. This next one I'd like to dedicate to my daughter Caitlin, who just turned 7 years old yesterday. It's entitled The Sleepwalker. She doesn't sleepwalk, but she's one of these kids who wake up in the middle of the night and yell for mommy or daddy just so she wants to know that we're still there. And then we're able to go back to bed. She doesn't do that as often as she used to. The Sleepwalker. Knowing the strength of her sleep, my daughter's come the hard way to haunt mine. Fingering her way along the backbone of the hall, gazing through the gauze of sleep, she enters the room and chants to the stuff of darkness. White witch, bride of sleep, powerful princess born to rule beyond my own dark dream, she snores the ancient words. Her moth eyes eat the sheet of darkness. Look past it, squint into the kaleidoscope of shattered light, into the microscope of hidden lives. Now I see her, a sheep broken into strange fields, and my tongue on the tip of song begins to shepherd her back from the cliffs, dangerous rocks, and the gray wolves with their bristling fear. I sing a lullaby to usher her down, to lead her back through the caves, shining my words in her eyes, baiting the trail with song and story. She follows, this time like a good horse bridled to my voice. She is filled with so much, yet carries it all so lightly. Inside her riding hood of sleep, she is galloping back to the barn, bearing a message from the edge of the kingdom. The borders are silent. The peasants are sleeping in the fields. The funeral of the magician's assistant. When the box closes, she is gone. At least we hope that she is gone. Gone for good this time and is not dropped into the black skirt of cloth that conceals this funeral home's dolly. We cross our fingers and pray she will not reappear in a puff of smoke to pose in the midst of this ceremony, costumed in her gaudy spangled dress and embarrass us all, unlocked, unchained, uncaged at last, her white breast fluttering in the pink of her face, her arms open to receive our applause. But today there is no applause, no white dove. The room remains silent and void of magic. We sit in quiet disbelief and listen for the return of her laughter. Listen for the laughter she learned to hold so well in the cage of her ribs as the thin palms of swords slid past, tickling her ass. Laughter she suppressed his audiences gasped at the simplest of tricks. We sit, watch, and wait as 6 black-coated magicians levitate her casket and trudge toward the open door. In the end, who would have guessed it would require 6 to carry a body that formerly had taken but 1? Who would have thought she would not return, not be once again holding her bladder in the stuffy air of darkness, crossing her long stockinged legs for luck, or humming a tune to entertain herself? Oh, if only she had slid down a chute toward her escape. If only now she waited out back in the bricked alley for the car, for the black hearse that might drive her toward some other name, some other life. Theaters from here, her blonde hair changing to dark, her breath blowing bouquets of flowers into the driver's grassy hair, her thin lips conjuring back a smile in the tricky mirrors. I'm going to turn now to some fiction, which has been occupying a lot of my time. Warren Fine, the novelist who died about a year and a half ago at the age of 44, told me 10 years ago when I was 20 that I should find some women to support me and stay home and write. And it's taken 10 years to follow that advice. Being at home and writing is something that's probably pretty rare as far as people who are writing seriously today, and I don't know why that is or why that should be. But due to this extra time, it's given me the freedom to pursue some different forms, one of which is the novel that I began in August, entitled Ordinary Happiness. I hesitate to give a brief outline here, because usually it sounds so hokey when people attempt to put into words what requires 200 pages of typewritten material to do. But basically, it's a story of a young man named Sonny and his relationship with an old woman and midwife by the name of Aunt Maud. It takes place in 1957 and runs up until 1979, from the time of Sonny's birth till the death of Aunt Maud. The boy loses his mother and grandmother early on and is illegally adopted by this midwife, and they travel about the Midwest doing what it is that midwives do, which is deliver babies. But throughout the book, Aunt Maud does not only deliver babies, but she also delivers Sonny, sometimes physically, sometimes spiritually, from death, either death or death of the spirit. Tonight I'm going to read the prologue and a bit of chapter 1 and 2 that's kind of been spliced together. Aunt Maud is dead, and Amanda and I have our child. Though the old woman and infant failed to meet as I had hoped, though one passed through the heavy curtain we call death before the other came into light, they are linked by an unfathomable cycle. Though one struggled to remain within the boundaries of this life and the other to enter, they are twins, one dead and the other newly born. They encompass the before and the after. They share the same bed. They lie close together. Amanda wipes the baby's mouth and presses her to the warmth of her breast, and the child sucks. Sounds like a small engine in the dark room. Further down the hall, the body of Aunt Maud lies stretched out on the bed, her head turned toward a window, her lips pressed to the lace of the pillow. Outside, the snow falls. The trees give up the last few leaves, and the snow clings to the roof of the barn, settles between the stubble of corn. It is strange to see the morning come, and difficult to believe that only a few hours ago Aunt Maud was still living, still giving me instruction from her bed, and that she who once was is now gone, and my child who once was unknown and hidden is now named. I sit at the kitchen table, feeling as though I have traveled an immense distance in just one short night. I look out at the fields, saddened that the old midwife could not have been the first to touch my daughter's head, but she was too close to dying as the child began to come, and I, with red and scrubbed hands, walked the hallway, paced back and forth from one room to the other, from deathbed to birthing chamber, checking on the progress of one and the demise of the other. For 10 hours I nursed them both. I moved between them and tried to make them comfortable, and as their times grew closer, as last night turned toward this morning and Amanda's contractions increased, and the pain and clutching breath of both rose up like strange yet compatible ghosts in the cramped and narrow hall, I confused their cries. I thought briefly that they had somehow switched rooms, that I would find Amanda slack-bellied on Maud's bed, her knees spread, her flower open to death, and that on inspection I would discover Maud sitting like a pale Buddha, occupying the room prepared for birth. Amanda screamed and Maud gasped, and I stood trapped between the two. I had my own struggle to contend with in that dark and musty hall. I battled in quiet desperation, turning first in one direction and then the other, standing quiet in one doorway and then venturing a peek at the next. For one heartbeat, I was trapped between the light at one end of the hall and the light at the other, and my own life seemed but a poor shadow caught between the two. I believe Maud would have understood. She of all people would have known my tendency for life and forgiven my choice. So I went into her room and sat down beside her. She was curled in a fetal position, withdrawn and bud-like, closed in on herself, and although she gave no recognition, I believe she could hear me as I quietly thanked her and said my goodbyes, told her how sorry I was I could not tend her, but that duty called. I told her there was someone knocking on the door, an old expression she used, when we'd arrive at a house where the labor was already well advanced. And so I had my brief farewell and went toward the birth, left Maud alone and tended my wife. How I wish Maud could have been there to see my daughter born, to witness her coming, to see how beautifully she hung at the end of the umbilical. Maud would have cried to see the cord cut, cried to see how my daughter breathed on her own, cut off from the great wind of any of us. And I know Maud would have commented on the strangeness of it all, how very sad and dangerous, how weak the connections, that only a thin thread tied us together, that the rope of flesh that dangled from my hand was all that kept us from extinction, and that the only hope we have is each generation breathing into the next. Yes, the birth went smooth. Maud taught me well, and when I finally remembered the old woman, it was too late. But what could I have done? Maud taught me it was birth that needed the hand, that death was a waiting, lonely thing and able to care for itself. And as I lay with Amanda and the child, and as the dawn began to possess the sky, I asked Amanda what name we should give the child, and of course she answered Maud. What else could she answer? So here I sit, a young man and new father, and begin to record my strange and impossible tale, so that I might be able to make better sense out of all that has happened. I sit in a house laced with the scent of birth and death, driven to write down something that happened to me in my youth, as if by the mere act of recording I could keep the sun and clouds from trailing off across the sky. When I think about it, it seems strange that what I'm about to relate occurred, or if it did occur, it was during the life I am presently leading. When I was young, I had smaller hands. I spoke with a voice different than I am using today. All my teeth have disappeared to be replaced by others. So it is easy for me to believe I was once more or less than I am now. It seems this world is filled with people like myself who are slowly sliding out of their lives and taking up others. Most of us resist at first, but then there are those who let themselves slip without a struggle, knowing they will lead many lives. They find themselves in a strange bed, unable to sleep, knowing their whole lives will be like this, full of truly strange experiences that are meant for only one person, experiences that pass into the realm of memory, which is neither life nor death. I myself am sometimes seized with the fear that nevertheless, beyond all the years my life, new or old, will not be there. One morning I will wake up and there will be no "do you remember?" I will have no remembrance of the past and give no thought to the eternal. You see, the world does a harm to Aunt Maud, my mother, and all the rest. It eats of them and they get digested, or else they decompose. Their memories twist into strange, unidentifiable shapes. The past is beyond my control and somehow lives and changes and will not leave me alone. The past carries the stuff of ghosts and leans into my waking day. My memories grow larger or smaller as they see fit. The curve of my skull, like a sideshow mirror, distorts and reshapes all that I have known. So if in this narrative I slide a bit, merging into the shadow toward confusion or perhaps boredom, it cannot be helped. Though I will struggle to hold this thundering train on track, it will be through no fault of my own that derailments occur and you are carried into the river or over the cliff. So before I forget, before it is all carried off, let me go back to Rachel. Let me go back to young mother, infant son, distant father. Let me go back to Omaha, because in the beginning there was Omaha, and my grandmother's large white house sitting like a cloud atop a green and rolling hill. And let there be a fair, dark-haired woman singing in the summer evening to a boy child. Let that child be me. Let Omaha fade in the dusk, because once there was mother, son, and Omaha. Once upon a time, in the summer of 1957, let there be lovely Rachel, just turned 19, sitting on the front porch of her mother's house. Rachel suffering, yearning for her darling who isn't there, while infant son squirms on her lap. And let me tell you what it was to be that son. Let me tell you what I remember. My life began late. For a week I remained unknown and nameless, hidden in the dark cupola of grandmother's house. For 7 days my birth certificate lay unsigned beside my mother's bed as they whispered their predictions and waited for me to die. They mentioned compounds and syrups, yet no pharmacist was consulted. They discussed the need for a doctor's attention, yet none was called. My mother, grandmother, and Aunt Maud spoke quietly together and waited for the hand of God. I was the frail secret that grandmother didn't want around. I was illegitimate and my sex was wrong, and she was of the opinion that I would fail, just as all men throughout all her life had failed her. But I didn't. To her great surprise, I endured her awful neglect. I grew stronger, and when it was certain I would survive, Aunt Maud signed the certificate, and reluctantly I was born. Reluctant to be born, reluctant to die. That is the phrase Aunt Maud would utter some 6 years after witnessing my birth, when, in the rain and wind, in the splintered opening of grandmother's storm cellar, I woke from a dream to find the old crone standing over me. And in that instant, as the ancient tissues of her throat quivered and the dim forest of sound opened once more between us, I knew I was not yet dead and that she had come to save me. The old woman said, "What you doin' down there, boy?" Then leaned into the darkness of the tornado's hole and took hold of my head. And shall I say that due to her powers, due to her hands, I thought she could pull me through to another world, that this midwife who once guided my skull through the blood-eating, straining hips of my mother still had the power to draw my 6-year-old flesh out of this life and deliver it into the next. And as her pressure increased, until even in my fright I was impressed and somewhat amused by her strength. When I thought she might tear my head from my shoulders, she lifted me from the hole no deeper than a grave and set me in the mud. "Where's your grandmother?" she asked, squatting beside me. I motioned to the dark pit from which I had just been pulled, but there was no movement among the heap of wood, broken canning jars, and earth. No sound, only the wind over the destroyed city and the rain as it fell to the mud and curled its way into the hole. "Rose," she whispered down to my grandmother, "come awake now, Rose." And then to the darkness, well, well, sonny boy, looks like you're all alone. I'll move back into some poetry now. This is probably one of my oldest poems. It's entitled One Sparrow. It's a sestina, which is a formal pattern of writing poetry. Once it was very popular, and then it's kind of gained a resurgence in the past 10 years or so. The lines are about 9 to 10 syllables long, and each line ends with a different word, and these words repeat themselves, ending each line throughout the poem. And those words are summer, pulled, room, soft, shade, and paper. And if you listen closely, you can hear those words repeating themselves in a pattern. The house is always dark and still on summer evenings. The yellow shades have been pulled against the heat, and as I go from room to room in failing light, there is only the soft spinning of blades below the window shade, the brush of these thin, tattered paper curtains in the breeze, the leafing of newspapers scattered across the floor. The wind in summer is warm here, and the trees do not seem to shade much. The cartoned ice cream I pulled from the freezer was already melting and soft. I felt my thumbs sink. And in a room upstairs, what sounded to be the bathroom, I heard the tearing of cloth or paper, not the shredding of the soft rolls of tissue, but the blinds that kept summer warmth beyond and not drawn or pulled into the room that was my only shade. I went there, found perched in yellow shade a sparrow, standing, pecking at the room's at the room's white curtain. How long and hard the bird pulled, straining with the stiff sheet of paper, trying to reach and escape back to the summer sun, to escape the porcelain tub to the soft wind. Finally, with a red towel, I spread the soft blanket over him. In the redness of the shade, he was stunned. I took him to the burned summer spots of brown grass. I would give him his room. He was wrapped up as if in a paper bag, and I grabbed two ends of the towel and pulled up and out, as if a magician who had pulled rabbits in a summer night by soft ears. The sparrow appeared against the paper leaves of the tree's shade, disappeared in a last glimpse of room between the boughs, beat his wings in summer wind. I walked in the summer night, pulled the screen door, closed in the room. Ice cream soft dripped. The night was all shade, and I took down paper. House painting. There is something in the new color of the paint that is turning our old house into a dream. Clapboard by clapboard, the full white house is waning, and a strange gray house is rising in its place. There is something in the hair of a young animal glued into wood that speaks to this house like a tongue, speaks the language of paint while the brush slap becomes water against the gunwale of a ship. There is something we are drowning as we carry bucket after bucket and pour them over the porch. Something has vanished that only the cat can detect, and he clings like a fly to the front door screen. There are our friends who refuse that porch too, use instead the back, where walls are white, paint peeled, the brown fruit of wood exposed and open as a wound, the old paint yearning, dreaming to be gone. And finally, there is the way we pause to fill the brush, to rest and relish the pure memory of the whiteness before moving on once again into the shadowed and growing darkness of our lives. The leaves. Grandmother, outside your wooden house, it is raining, it is dusk. The old woman elms of the yard hover patient in the dark, hover patient and dark in the slow rain. Good nurses who have never left your side, who for 80 years have given up the kindness of yellow leaves, give them up again. The yellow leaves melt in the smoky night. Other nurses tend you now. I stand in the quiet scented kitchen among the white bones of porcelain, the cast iron skillets and brown crockery plates that know of my hunger, and I smell the leaves, the spice, the rain. The wind whips up, and now the rain changes to leaves. For some reason I think of your hands autumns and autumns ago, rising from a steaming sink, coming gently down into my own. Then suddenly I see it, resting where it has always been, beside the sink. This piece almost gone, only a sliver really, a yellow leaf, the yellow slope. A hatching. The sparrows hatching in our garage disturb my sleep. I wake and tell my wife I can hear them, can't help but hear them chipping away this dark night. She listens. No, she says, there is nothing. Only a moth against a bulb, a dripping faucet, a pacing cat, the house in all its slow maneuvering, go back to sleep. But I can't. The thin wings of the heart beat in my chest. My tongue is warm, moist, hardening to a beak against my teeth. My hands are suddenly aware of the white enveloping sheet. I lie awake and listen for a small sound, some sure sign, some frail lesson that something still has the power to break through, still has the courage to release its strange, weak self into this cold, hardening world. And one last poem, and I'll leave you with that. The Sailing Barn. I should have known that barn was preparing to sail, should have read the clues. Let me start over. I should have known that barn was preparing to sail, should have read the signs, gathered the clues, the way she began to lean with the wind, pulling up from the foundation as if from a dock, dropping boards like gangplanks or ropes into the dust. The voice of timber, sailors, calling from the rafters, groaning in the night as they loaded her up, should have sent me to packing, made me jump aboard her and stow away. No one would have found me. Crouched and silent, I would have been too darkly within those shadows, hidden in some dusty corner like a sack, shanghaied from the summer, a volunteer from the audience. And as we sailed, thin blades of light would fall through cracks like swords through a magician's box. Pigeons would burst into doves, fly from the sleeves of darkened windows, leaving the neighborhood to wonder where I'd vanished. Bunkmate with the mice, steward to the spider, a sailor of shadow napping in a crow's nest, I would have survived that journey untouched, become an immigrant to a new world, a pioneer of dust. And what would the passage have cost? What would my fare have been? Only the evenings. It was the evenings that began the barn's journey, that were sending it slowly away from port. Those long, pale evenings that ran like a gray dye through our lawn and washed the fireflies up. Those evenings that turned the sky to down, turned the clouds to gray pillows of dusk. It was the evenings that left that barn wrecked beside our house in town, that turned fields to bluegrass, moon to street lamps, barn animals to tomcats, who hunted yellow-eyed in the barn's empty belly. It was the evenings that were sending the barn away, that send us all away. As pigeons murmur to the eaves, and the eaves lean toward evening, the barns are sailing off with another light and vanishing. Thank you very much.